On the Run, Book 2 of the America Falls series. Written by Scott Medbury. Narrated by Adam Barr. All characters and events depicted in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Part 1. Get Out. 1. Sonny pulled the truck to a jerking halt in the middle of the road and slumped over the wheel. "Oh, shit," Luke said, a hand on Sonny's shoulder. "Isaac, can you drive? I haven't really driven." "I don't know if I could drive this," I said, hiding my surprise that Luke, usually so self-confident, was perhaps afraid of driving. "I only learned to drive my foster parents' car after the flu." "You'll have to," Sonny said, weakly. "It's auto." He struggled to sit up straight and then put the shifter into park before leaning drunkenly over Luke. "Isaac, go," said my friend, a hint of panic in his voice. He shuffled across the seat toward me and eased Sonny out of the driver's seat. As soon as he was away from the door, I saw the bullet hole in it. It had obviously been fired as we fled, and from the dark stain on his jacket, had hit Sonny in the side. As much as I didn't want to drive the truck, I wasn't going to argue while the guy who had rescued us from the Chinese army was sitting there with a gunshot wound. I opened my door and jumped out, slamming it behind me before running around the front of the truck and ripping open the driver's side door. The seat where Sonny had been sitting was splattered with blood. I climbed in and closed the door. Sonny was next to me, resting against Luke. "Hold pressure on it here," Sonny told Luke in a matter-of-fact way. "I've lost enough blood to feel lightheaded, but I think if we can stem the bleeding, I'll be okay. It seems to have passed all the way through, but I don't think it's hit anything vital." He closed his eyes. "Drive!" Luke roared at me. I put the truck into drive and started down the street. Thank God it was an automatic. I was afraid to drive too fast because of the ice, but I found that the truck wasn't really any more difficult to drive than Eleanor's Honda. I thought about continuing the evasive route that Sonny had been following, but I was worried it would take too much time. I certainly didn't want him to bleed to death while I was meandering around Worcester. With that in mind, I decided to head straight back to the academy as soon as I came to a cross street I recognized. It took us a good 20 minutes before we finally pulled the truck into the alley near the side door. Ben and Brooke were standing by the door waiting for us when we arrived, along with Karen. My heart sank as I remembered Arthur. Although he was pretty out of it, Sonny came to when we pulled him as gently as possible from the truck. We were surrounded by the rest of our group as we laid him on a pile of folded-up practice mats just inside the door. Looking around at the concerned faces, I saw Karen trying to catch my eye. I wouldn't meet her intense gaze, though. Instead, I looked quickly down at Sonny before she could ask the inevitable question. Thankfully, none of the others seemed to notice Arthur's absence. Yet. In a pained voice, Sonny ordered John to go and get the bottle of vodka he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, and the superglue in the drawer above it. I had no idea what he planned to do, and in truth, I am somewhat ashamed to admit I was spending as much time finding ways to avoid looking at Karen as I did worrying about Sonny. I took it for granted, I think, that Sonny would be okay. "Help me hold him down," Luke said, giving me a tap on the shoulder. "Everyone else, just stand back a little, please. When we clean the wound, it's going to hurt like hell." "All right, I'll get his shoulders," I replied, less distracted now as I shuffled around. "Help me sit up," Sonny grunted. "Give me some of that to drink before you pour it on the wound. It'll help dull the pain, you know?" "Sure." I helped Sonny lift his head and shoulders and allowed him to prop himself up against me. He grimaced in pain. "You'll be okay," I said to him as he took the bottle from Luke. "After we patch up the holes, you can get some rest. You'll be as good as new in no time." Sonny's body tensed and shuddered as he swallowed a couple of good-sized gulps of the vodka. Of course, I had no idea if he would be okay, and wondered if my words sounded as hollow to him as they did to me. "Let's get this over with," he said through gritted teeth, and handed the bottle back to Luke. "Pour it on." Sonny's cry echoed throughout the academy. Luke applied superglue to the sterilized and surprisingly neat wounds, entry and exit, and sealed them closed. I had no idea superglue could be used that way, but, as he worked, Luke told us superglue was originally created for just these sorts of situations. Strangely enough, he also said tampons had been created during World War I, originally designed as wound bandages because of their ability to soak up copious amounts of blood. They hadn't become a feminine hygiene product until later, after the war, when there was a huge surplus. His educational banter seemed to calm everyone, and once again, I was grateful I hadn't set out alone all those days ago. "You'll probably have hellacious scars," he said to Sonny, as he blew on the exit wound to dry the glue quicker. "But there shouldn't be much else in the way of complications, unless the bullet hit something important on its way through." "Do you want us to move you someplace more comfortable?" I asked Sonny. "I think I'm good here for now," he slurred, waving his hand weakly in my direction. "Have somebody bring me a blanket, and make sure the supplies get loaded on the truck ASAP." He winced as he pushed himself into a more comfortable position on top of the mats. "Luke, give me what's left of that bottle. It'll help me go to sleep faster." I didn't know if that was a good idea, given our situation, but I held my tongue. Worst case, between us we could load an unconscious Sonny into the truck without too much of a struggle. "Here you go, man," Luke said, handing him the quarter-full bottle of vodka. "Knock yourself out." I looked at Luke, wondering if he'd been trying to make a joke, but he looked serious enough. Now that Sonny was out of action, I took charge again. Time was all important. We only had a small window in which to make our escape. "Okay, Ben, why don't you, Brooke, and Allie start loading up some food, while John and Samara gather blankets and bedding. Luke, you and Mark set up a mat for Sonny in the back of the truck." "Shouldn't we wait till he's recovered?" Mark asked. "Isn't the plan for him to drive, so in case their soldiers see us, we'll have a Chinese man driving?" "Well, he's in no shape to drive, as you saw, and we can't afford to wait. Looks like I'm going to be the one driving. We just have to hope the Chinese army doesn't get a good look at me and I don't crash on the first corner." No one laughed at my attempted humor. I looked around at every single one of them, my eyes lingering on Karen for a moment before I moved on. If what Sonny's contact told him is correct, we need to get out of here by tomorrow. And with the Tigers stirred up, time is even more vital, whether Sonny's in condition to drive or not. I paused for a moment longer, and then told them about the conversation I overheard the night before. "So, what do you want me to do?" Indigo said. "You gave everybody else jobs, but not me." "I was hoping you would stay here and watch over Sonny," I said, turning to look at her. "Make sure he stays warm and comfortable." "All right, I guess I can handle that," she replied. "Thanks," I said, before turning my gaze back to Karen. I felt a lump in my throat and sick to my stomach, but I knew what I had to do. "Karen, can I talk to you for a sec up in Sonny's office? Privately?" "It's Arthur, isn't it? Just tell me what happened. He's dead, isn't he?" she blurted. With the subject broached, the questions came fast and furious from her mouth, and the others in the room began to disperse, discomfort clear on their faces. "Please, Karen, let's just talk in the office." Tears welled in her eyes, and her shoulders slumped in resignation. We didn't talk as we took the long walk from the alley door to Sonny's office at the other end of the building. How am I going to tell her? Was the question running through my head. I knew, of course, I was going to have to tell her the truth. How I was going to tell it to her, that was a different story altogether. What I was really asking myself was, what form of the truth was I going to tell her? The question of exactly how much responsibility I should take for Arthur's death was also lurking in the shadowed corners of my mind. When we got to Sonny's office, I held the door for her and followed her in, closing it gently behind me. "What happened?" Her voice trembled slightly, and a solitary tear ran down her cheek. As used to losing people as we had become, the pain was never any less severe. There was a long silence as she wiped the tear away and looked at the floor, trying to contain her grief. "Karen, I'm sorry. So sorry," I said softly. He had just saved my life, and he was fighting to the very end, but one of the tigers snuck up on us and shot him from a distance. It killed him instantly. "What happened to the tiger who shot him?" Her voice still trembled, but now I was having trouble distinguishing whether it was from grief or rage. "Dead," I said. "I killed him." "How?" "I don't think." "How?" "I shot him in the head." "Good," she said simply, and walked out. 2. The word spread about Arthur's death, and considering the tears and shock, especially of those in Sonny's original group, everyone did an excellent job getting all the supplies stowed away. It took about 2 hours to get the truck loaded, and we left plenty of room for those that would be riding back there. When we had finished loading the truck, I called everybody in for a meeting in the main practice room. Sonny was sleeping, but seemed to be okay. So I asked Indigo to join us as well. I looked at each of them. John, Karen, Allie, Samara, Mark, Luke, Ben, Brooke, and Indigo. I thought of Arthur and wondered if we would lose any more of them on our trip north to the sanctuary promised by the coded message. I knew it was very likely. "I wanted to talk to you all about leadership," I said. "As long as Sonny is down, I think it would be a good idea for us to elect a new leader. Someone who can make decisions for the entire group, especially if and when the shit hits the fan." "Well, you seem to have put yourself in charge, what with calling this meeting and all, and telling us what to do when we were loading the truck," Mark said. It was said in a matter-of-fact way, not meanly, but I felt my face flush anyway. When he finished speaking, a confusing babble of voices rose as everybody started talking all at once. Guys, Luke said, raising his hands. "One at a time." "What's wrong with democracy?" John asked. "I think we should all get a vote before we do anything as a group." "Normally I'd agree with you," I replied. "But there may come a time, sooner or later, when we'll have to make a decision fast, and there won't be time for a vote. That's why I want to take a vote now. So when the time comes, we can all agree on whose lead to follow." "Why don't you be the leader, Isaac?" Brooke asked. "I mean, after all, you're going to be the one doing the driving. It would be logical for you to be the one to make any quick decisions while we're traveling." "No, I won't just take the lead. I'll accept responsibility if I'm voted leader, but I'm not going to just claim the position," I said. In truth, the very thought of being leader scared me. I wasn't certain I was the right man for the job, and being responsible for the well-being of a group of 10 was not something I was totally comfortable with. "Why don't we just wait until Sonny wakes up? If he's too weak to lead us, maybe he has a preference for who should lead us in his place," Allie said. "After all, before you guys showed up, Arthur was his second in command." "Arthur's not here," Karen said, her voice retaining an edge of the cold rage I had heard earlier. "And for all we know, Sonny may never wake up either. And even if he does, we have no idea how out of it he's going to be. Isaac's right. I say we vote on a new leader now." "Sonny's going to be okay, right?" Samara asked, with a slight quaver in her voice. I realized she had not yet contemplated the possibility that our makeshift medical job might not prove up to the task of saving him. "Sure he will," Mark said, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders, casting a wicked glare in Karen's direction. "We'll have to wait and see," I said. "But I'm almost sure he will be fine. Right, Luke?" "Yeah," said Luke. "I don't know how the bullet managed to go through him without hitting anything vital, but I'm pretty sure it did. There was no major bleeding, and if it had hit bone, I'm pretty sure he would have been in a lot more pain than he was. I'd say he has a decent shot of recovering." "Right. So the main reason I don't want to wait for him is because I'm worried one of these situations might pop up before he wakes up or is thinking straight enough to decide for us." "Let's vote, then," Ben said. "How are we going to do it? By secret ballot? Raise of hand? Ayes or nays?" "How about this?" Luke said. "I nominate Isaac. Anybody who wants him to be interim leader, raise your hand." Luke put his own hand up, followed quickly by Ben and Brooke. The rest looked around at each other for a moment before Karen's hand went up to join in. Indigo was watching me. "I see you haven't voted for yourself," she said. "Is that because of modesty or fear?" "A bit of both," I answered truthfully. "But I guess if people are willing to follow me, I should be willing to lead." I raised my hand. "I think you'll make an excellent leader," Indigo said, raising her hand as well. That was a majority, 6 out of 10. "Fine. Isaac can be the temporary leader until Sonny is up and healthy again," John said, shaking his head and putting up his hand. "I still think this is bogus," Allie muttered, but raised her hand anyway. "Looks like it's official. You're the boss, Luke said, giving me a broad smile. I caught myself wondering if he had nominated me so quick to make sure nobody would put him in the mix as well. Luke was universally well liked by the people of the academy, as well as by the twins and myself. "Fair enough. Thanks, guys. Well, my first suggestion is that we try to get some rest," I said. "Sonny was planning on leaving about noon tomorrow, but I think we should get started earlier than that." "I'm going to go back and check on Sonny," Indigo said. "Now that the leadership issue is settled, I think the meeting is pretty much over, right?" "Yep," I said. "I'll go with you." I ignored Luke's knowing snigger as I ran to catch up with Indigo as she headed for the exit. I did want to check on Sonny, but I was also eager to spend more time with Indigo. I figured our wounded leader would sleep most of the night after his trauma and the vodka, so we would probably get the chance to talk a lot more. I was embarrassed later, when Luke told me the only person who thought I was doing a good job of hiding the crush I had on Indigo was me. If Indigo knew, she did a good job of playing it cool. She was perfectly nice to me, which only made me like her more, and never gave any indication I was bothering her. I don't know if the feelings I had for her would grow into anything more than a crush, but at that time, I was kind of infatuated, and the very fact that she was giving me the time of day made me feel on top of the world, despite all that had happened in the last few hours. Sonny was still asleep, as I figured he would be, and we spent the next couple of hours in the hall making small talk while we watched over him. We learned more about each other's lives prior to the flu, and it wasn't long before she knew more about me than Luke, Brooke, and Ben combined did. Thankfully, she seemed okay with what she heard. I really don't know how I would have handled being rebuffed at that point. Eventually, we decided Sonny was just going to keep sleeping. Indigo said she wanted to go to her room to get some sleep, so I went off to get some as well. "Hey, wake up, man." Somebody shook me, and I opened my eyes to see Luke looking down at me. "Sonny's awake, and he wants to talk to you." "What time is it?" I asked, sitting up and glancing around. It was still dark outside. "Just after 6 or so." "Okay." I pulled myself out of the sleeping bag and quickly rolled it up so it would be easier to move to the truck when we left. "Did Sonny say what he wants?" "Not to me," Luke replied with a shrug. Maybe he found out you're in charge now and wants to give you some advice. Or maybe he wants to tell me to put someone else in charge, I said. Too late for that, man. We already voted. I could abdicate, I said. You won't, he said. We both know having you as leader is for the best. Do we? What about you? You seem to know how to handle this stuff pretty well. I'm not as smart as you are, Luke said. I don't get the gut instinct you do, which has done us okay so far. Plus, in any given situation, I tend to latch on to the first option my mind hits and follow it without thinking it through all the way. In short, I'd be a pretty decisive leader. We're probably not the best. I'd probably get a rush of blood and lead us into a disaster. Well, sounds like you've thought this through. Yep, he nodded. Now go see what Sonny wants. I grunted while I stretched my muscles, and then headed toward the hall where we had left Sonny the night before. I thought about stopping to check on Indigo on my way, but decided letting her sleep a bit longer would probably be appreciated, not to mention less stalker-like. I found Sonny sitting up and alert, although clearly weak, with Allie by his side. "Isaac, good job last night," Sonny said as I walked up. "I know it's not ideal, but you'll have to drive when we leave. I'm not up to it." "Yeah, I figured as much. Are you feeling better?" "To be honest, it hurts like hell, but I may be up to driving the second half of the trip to New Hampshire. Listen, I have a plan to help prevent this," he pointed to his bandaged wound, "from happening to you." I nodded and squatted next to him. "What is it?" "The reams of printer paper I had them get from the office building across the street," he said. "Take the interior panels of the doors off, stack the reams of paper inside, and then put the panels back on. I think I saw a TV show where they did that, but with phone books. Will it really work?" "If we only have to face small arms fire, it should work well enough, but if we get hit with anything like anti-armor weapons..." He glanced at Allie, who was listening attentively. "Well, let's just hope we don't have to face anything heavier. You won't be able to roll the windows down once you get the paper in there, but it's so cold I don't suppose that's a problem." "Yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem for anyone," I said. "I'll get right on it. By the way, I've been wondering about the toner cartridges as well. Why did you have them collect so many?" "Up in the attic, in the base of the samurai sword stand, you'll find 15 or 16 old blasting caps, the kind with fuses that can be lit with a match or lighter. By themselves, they can't do much damage, but I figured if we taped each one to a toner cartridge, we could make some fairly effective ink bombs. Detonate one of them on a pursuing vehicle's windshield, and the driver would be in trouble." "Where did you get the blasting caps?" Never mind. It doesn't really matter. I'll have Luke grab some tape and the toners and begin making the bombs while I see to the truck doors. By the way, I know you planned on leaving around noon, but I'm thinking we might want to be out of here a bit earlier than that." "Anytime you're ready to go," Sonny said. "Allie told me about the vote, and I approve. You're leader now for as long as necessary. Just until you get back up and on your feet." "We'll see," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "Maybe you'll turn out to have a natural talent for leadership." Surprisingly, a fog had blanketed the city while I was sleeping, and the alley and streets around it were cloaked in a thick, white mist, so heavy even the far end of the alley where it opened into the street was difficult to make out. This could be handy, I thought. The fog could help cover our escape. It took me about an hour, maybe a little longer, to finish armoring the doors of the truck. By then, Luke and John were nearly finished making the ink bombs. I began to think we might be out of there as early as 9 a.m. As I was heading back in the side door to grab my sleeping bag and the rest of my stuff, I heard a loud banging. It came from the front of the building, and with adrenaline racing through my system, I dumped the gear and ran into the hallway as Ben came hustling in from the reception area. "Isaac, it's the Tigers," he said breathlessly. "I peeked through the window, and there are 4 of them at the door, all armed. What should we do?" I guess we should see what they want, I replied, a cold dread gripping my belly. Do me a favor and go get Luke and John. Tell them what's happening and to meet me by the front door. As Ben hurried off, I pulled out my revolver and made sure it was fully loaded before slipping it back into my belt. I then picked up the Chinese assault rifle standing against the wall and began walking to the academy's front door. I stayed out of view from the street by ducking down as I passed by windows. The building's front door was much like those of many schools I had been to. Solid double doors with windows of obscured reinforced glass taking up the top half. The doors had push bars on the inside and handles for pulling on the outside, but were currently locked and chained. It was quiet now, and I couldn't make out anybody through the door's windows. I approached silently with the rifle's safety off and flattened myself against the wall to the right of the doors, straining to hear anything to tell me they were still there. I jumped as 5 loud raps shook the door on its hinges. I know you're in there, Sonny. You and your gang of little virus-proof kids. Come on out. We just want to talk. I've got some questions for you. I recognized Chen's voice immediately. It had the same arrogant, almost sing-song quality to it that I'd witnessed in the car park. My brother Jack got shot. You remember Jack, don't you, Sonny? My little brother. And then when I tracked down the murdering bastards who killed him, a couple more of my boys got wasted, and those murdering dogs got away in a truck. And guess what? That fucking truck is right in the alley next to your building. Sonny knows these guys better than I thought. Or they know him. Chen continued before I could ruminate on this realization any further. One of the guys we killed was wearing your colors, Sonny. I know you have the Laowai who killed Jack in there. Just hand him over, and we can put all this behind us. I waited for him to finish, and then addressed the door calmly. Sonny isn't available right now, I said. I'll be happy to relay your message and concerns. What? You think this is some kind of fucking joke? You tell Sonny to get out here now. I don't care if he walked away from us 4 years ago. Once you're a red tiger, you're a tiger for life. So that was how Sonny knew so much about them. Again, I'll pass it along. More swearing, and then the voices quietened. I saw Luke and John come into the hallway and waved them back out of sight. Leaving my position by the door, I hugged the wall and stealthily made my way to them. We could have a problem here, guys, I said quietly. Go check the truck in the alley, very carefully, to see if they're watching it. If it's clear, get everybody loaded up as quickly as possible. Grab my stuff if you can. Are all the bombs done? We still got like 3 to do, Luke said. All right, make sure some of them are packed up in the cab. Luke, you'll be riding up front with me, I said. We can finish making the last few on the road. What are you going to do? John asked. Stay and watch the door, of course, I replied. Come right back if the truck's being watched. Otherwise, get everybody loaded ASAP, then send someone back to get me. Okay, we're on it, John said. I watched as he and Luke turned and hurried back down the hall. Turning back to the door, I knelt and brought the assault rifle up to my shoulder and waited. A couple of minutes passed before he rapped on the door again. Last chance, Sonny! This time I didn't answer. I heard their voices, but couldn't make out any of the actual words, although I got the impression that Chen was quickly running out of patience. Another loud bang and the door's safety glass shattered, spraying the floor in front of me with glass. The wire reinforcement bowed inwards and held for 2 more hard blows from an aluminum baseball bat before falling through on the 4th blow. The end of the bat was thrust through the window and ran around the edges to knock off any remaining shards of glass. An arm came through, reaching down for the push bar to open the door. I squeezed the trigger. My selector was set correctly this time, and my aim was better. The assault rifle fired 3 successive shots, all hitting the wall beside the door as a warning. The arm disappeared immediately, and a second later, a barrage of small arms fire began peppering the door. I ducked behind a wall as the bullets pinged off the walls of the hallway. They coming in? Luke called from around the corner at the end of the hall. "Soon, I think." The hail of bullets petered out and then stopped completely. I peeked back around the corner at the door, which now looked like Swiss cheese. There was no movement. "Is everybody loaded and ready?" Luke put his head around the corner and nodded before holding out a toner cartridge with a blasting cap taped to it. The fuse was half a foot long. "I say we light this bad boy and slide it down the hall before they break in," Luke said. "I bet it'll give 'em a hell of a surprise." I saw another shadow at the window. They obviously assumed whoever was on the other side was dead or had run off. The arm came through the window again, scrabbling blindly for the bar that would open it. "Do it," I mouthed and watched as he lit the fuse with a lighter and slid the toner cartridge down the hall toward the door. It whizzed by me and came to rest in the broken glass a few feet in front of the doors, the lit fuse sputtering like those on one of the bombs from a Looney Tunes cartoon. I left my position and ran down the hall past Luke. "Come on!" I yelled. He followed right on my heels. We were about halfway to the side door when we heard the ink bomb go off behind us with a loud bang. We had no way of knowing if it had hurt or even slowed down any of the tigers, but the sound of the explosion gave my heart a quick jolt of excitement. I felt a strange elation and suddenly understood the term adrenaline junkie. 3. The cloying fog still lay thickly about the alley as Luke and I hurried to the truck. Sonny confirmed that there had been no sign of the tigers. It surprised me. Obviously, they knew the truck was here. Chen had specifically mentioned it. Maybe he didn't expect Sonny to run. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. It just made our life a little easier for a minute or two. Luke and I checked the back to make sure everybody was inside and ready. They had done a good job of packing. Boxes of gear had been stacked up and strapped against the side walls. It would offer little protection in the event of an all-out attack, but might protect against a stray bullet here and there. Someone had the good sense to hang ropes from the metal meshing that lined the roof of the cargo bay, and Sonny was directing everybody to wrap the ropes around their wrists and grip them to offer some stability against the movement of the truck. I gave him the thumbs up before we pulled down the door and secured it. Luke and I rushed to the cab where Indigo was already waiting for us. Being a local, she had volunteered to navigate us out of the city in place of the injured Sonny. She moved into the middle, and Luke and I climbed in on either side of her. She looked nervous, gripping the revolver I had given her tightly, as if she was ready to use it at any second. "I haven't spotted anyone," she said, indicating the end of the alleyway in the distance. "But that might be because of the fog. You better hurry." I started the truck with the intention of letting it warm up for a few minutes, but my hand was forced when a figure materialized out of the fog in the alley. He took one look and then ran out of sight, presumably to go and tell Chen of our impending escape. I gunned the engine and the truck lurched forward. I'm embarrassed to say I took out a few garbage bins along the way, and at one point, the wing mirror on the passenger side scraped along the brick wall as we picked up speed and barreled down the alley. I didn't know whether there would be tigers waiting for us at the end of the alley or not, but I knew I wouldn't be stopping if they were stupid enough to try and block our escape by standing in the way. I slowed only slightly as we approached the mouth of the alley. "Turning right is the quickest way to get to a freeway," Indigo said, her voice tight with tension. "I know, but that'll take us right past the front door," I replied. "They'll shoot at us for sure, and from that range they won't miss." "Left then, and around the block," she suggested. I nodded and took my foot off the brake pedal. The truck was speeding up again when a figure appeared out of the fog to the right. It was Chen. His right hand and the sleeve of his jacket were covered in black ink. I didn't have time to gloat because that same ink-covered hand was holding a handgun, which he was calmly raising toward us. My eyes met his, and I saw him bare his teeth as he began firing at the truck. I flinched, trying to make myself as small a target as possible, while Luke and Indigo ducked under the dashboard. He was either a bad shot, or he was trying to disable the truck rather than kill us. The passenger side window was shattered by one of the rounds, and others thudded into the front and doors of the truck. I gritted my teeth and drove the truck straight at him. He jumped out of the way just before I struck him, and I swung left, taking the corner way too fast. Indigo and Luke yelled like they were on a roller coaster as the truck tilted dangerously and then righted itself before I accelerated down the street and away from the academy and the tigers. By the time I checked the rearview mirror, Chen was lost in the fog behind us. "Everybody up here all right?" I asked. "Yeah," Luke said, brushing broken glass off his lap and onto the floor. "Looks like the printer paper armor worked great." "Indigo?" "Yes, I'm all right," she said, her voice solemn. "Without a window, this is going to be a pretty cold ride." "Turn the heat up. It might help some. Luke, help me keep a watch behind us. I'm going to drive around randomly for a while in case we are being chased." "No problem, man," Luke said, his eyes glued to the passenger side mirror. He reached out and adjusted it so he could see out of it better, making it useless to me as a driving aid. We hurtled through the fog, although perhaps the term hurtled is a little ambitious. On a brumous day like that one, doing 30 miles an hour was pushing it. Brumous? Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite words. It's one I learned when I was reading dictionaries and thesauruses for fun, back when I was a kid. Nerdy, huh? Well, blame my mom. She was an English teacher. Anyway, it means of gray skies and winter days filled with heavy clouds or fog. Cold, sunless weather, in other words. Throw in the snow and ice, and the day we left the academy sure fits that definition. In fact, it could well be the most brumous of all the brumous days I've ever experienced. After making random rights and lefts for 10 or 12 blocks, there was still no sign of pursuit, and I was becoming thoroughly lost. The truck CB had sputtered a few times, but it appeared the Chinese were not talking too much that morning either, probably waiting for the fog to burn off, I guessed. Finally, I stopped the truck at an intersection. I think that's enough weaving to throw them off the scent. "Which way from here, Indigo?" She took a few moments to take in our surroundings. If you make a U-turn and go back to the last intersection, turn left there, and it'll put you on Park Avenue. That should take us all the way north, out of the city, before it meets up with I-190. "Sounds good," I said, putting the truck in drive and pulling forward and to the right. A U-turn was impossible, so I stopped again and put it in reverse, doing a 3-point turn in the middle of the intersection. Let's get this party started. To be honest, I was glad Indigo was the one who sat in front to give directions. Just having her sitting near me up in the cab made me feel good inside. You know, warm and fuzzy, even though it was damn cold with Luke's window busted out. I was surprised to even be thinking about girls, considering how much danger we were in. We found Park Avenue easily enough, exactly where Indigo said it would be, and I turned in the direction she indicated. The further north we went, the thicker the fog became, to the point where I could barely make out the buildings along the street. I had to slow down considerably. I didn't want to collide with abandoned cars or any other obstacles. The visibility was so poor that I wouldn't be able to stop in time, even going as slow as 25 miles an hour. While we kept our eyes peeled for any movement or signs of pursuit, we chatted as the truck crawled northward on Park. My earlier assessment of Indigo was only reinforced by our conversation. She was easily the most amazing person I had ever met. I must admit to being a bit jealous that day, though, because it became apparent that Indigo understood a lot more of Luke's video game references than I did. It was also the first time I recall Luke talking about his sister, Rose. When his parents divorced 4 years ago, Rose was 5, and the courts split custody. Luke had stayed with his father, while Rose had gone with their mother to Chicago. Luke even mentioned going to Chicago to find Rose, talking about it like some sort of grand quest in his future. I personally had my doubts about the feasibility of such an undertaking, but could totally understand his urge to try. Talking about her made me think of my family again, and I quickly buried the painful emotions that came with that memory. It was lucky I had decided to take the way out of the city at a crawl. 3 separate times in the first 6 or 8 blocks of travel along Park Avenue, we had to weave around vehicles in the road. If we had tried to leave at high speed in the thick fog, we would almost certainly have collided with one of them. I thought about the highway-turned parking lot back at Fort Carter, and I wondered if we would encounter a similar mess when we finally found the freeway entrance from Worcester. I didn't think so. The Chinese appeared to be much more active in this state and would almost certainly have begun clearing the freeways for their own purposes, just as we heard they had been clearing the bodies from Warwick using American children as slave labor. The silence and the emptiness of the drive through the city was surreal. I was finally beginning to feel a little bit better about the prospects of getting out of there safely when we heard the muffled roar of motorcycles echoing over the sound of the truck. "Crap," said Luke. "I think the Tigers are on our tail again," Indigo said. "A street gang who rides motorcycles?" Luke said, his voice incredulous. "Come on." "If it is, we could be in trouble," I said, looking into my side mirror to see if I could make out any shapes in the thick fog behind us. I knew it was useless. They'd be almost on top of us before we saw them. "I'm worried about the guys in the back if they come up behind us." While the supplies packed along the outer walls would provide some protection for gunfire hitting the sides of the truck, for obvious reasons, there was nothing against the back door of the truck. All that stood between the passengers and potential bullets coming from behind was a rolling door that had not been designed to stop them. "You could pull off at the next intersection and we could wait for them to pass," Luke said. "There's no guarantee it's the Tigers anyway. How could they realistically be tracking us down in this fog? Maybe it's someone else." "It's them," I said. He didn't argue. "I don't want to be a sitting duck on the side of the road when they find us. The least we can do is give them a moving target." "I think Luke is right," Indigo interjected. "Not about it being someone else. It's the Tigers for sure, but I think we should take a side street and let them pass. We shouldn't wait too long, though. The fog will hide us for a while, but I think it would be a good idea if we were well out of the city by the time it burns off." I looked at both of them. "You sure?" They both nodded, and I slowed the truck and turned right at the next intersection. We drove a block before pulling the truck to the side of the street. "Did anyone notice the name of the street we're on?" asked Indigo. "I lost my bearings a little in the fog." We hadn't. "Should I shut the truck off?" I asked. I was worried the rumbling of the engine would carry in the fog, just as the roar of the motorcycles did. "Yeah, why don't you go ahead and shut it down for a few minutes, Isaac? I'm going to jump out and find out what road we're on." "Okay, but be careful." Luke hopped out of the truck and jogged into the fog. A couple of minutes later, he was back at the passenger side door, and we heard the motorcycles passing the intersection where we had turned. They had only been about a minute and a half behind us, and I was glad I'd gone with the majority and stopped. Luke climbed back into the cab. "We're on Foster Street." "Okay, good. I thought we were here, but the fog makes it look so different," Indigo said. "If we go another block and then turn left, we should be on a street that leads back onto Park." "I like the sound of that," Luke said. "We don't have to sit here and wait. I'd rather get moving again right away." "That's the sort of enthusiasm I like to hear," I said, switching the truck back on as the sound of our pursuers faded into the distance. "Enthusiasm nothing," Indigo giggled. "I think Luke realized the heater doesn't work when the truck's not running." "Well, there is that too," Luke said with a grin. "This road curls around, so in about another mile and a half, it will merge onto Park Avenue," said Indigo. "Okay, sounds good." And it did, until we factored in the fog and the slow driving speed. At least we didn't have to try and outrun motorcycles. "This kind of reminds me of the setup for an old PC game," Luke said, his eyes peering intently ahead through the thick fog blanketing us. "By old, I mean real old. I found it in a box of my dad's old games and had to run this emulator thing to get it to work on our computer. It started out with a group of people getting lost in a thick fog like this and getting transported to a magical world." "We should be so lucky," I said, as I steered around a minivan sitting directly in the middle of the street. "I don't know, man," Luke replied. "That magical world was full of dragons and vampires and other nasty shit. I don't know how long we'd last there." That's a tough choice, Indigo said. Dragons and vampires, or tigers and enemy soldiers. They sound just as bad as each other if you ask me. Yeah, I'd probably take a vampire over Chen. He kind of looks like he wants to rip my throat out anyway, I said. Said Luke. Maybe he's in the fog, waiting to jump on the truck and pull you out through the window. It was said lightly, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. The empty, fog-shrouded streets were creepy, and my unease was compounded by Luke's very descriptive remark. I think he sensed my discomfort. Sorry, all this fog just reminded me of the game, that's all. No worries. Was it a good game? I asked. It was pretty good, considering it was ancient and the graphics were pretty crap. It seemed my pensive mood was contagious, and all of us were silent as we crawled 2 more blocks. There was a question in my mind, but I wasn't going to raise it in our current situation. The question of why we hadn't seen any dead bodies in the streets, except for a handful in snow-covered cars. Probably because the virus, the Pyongyang flu, was pretty slow-acting on an individual basis. If Alan and Eleanor were any guide, the infected adults had gotten ill up to 24 hours or so before they died. If so, it figured most of them would have died indoors, tucked up in bed as their children tried to care for them. And the children? One had to assume that the younger ones were probably still locked inside with their dead parents, and the older ones, like us, were holed up waiting for help, or wandering around trying to make their way in this new world. That, or they were already slaves to the Chinese. A fresh wave of hatred for the Chinese government washed over me. Hatred for what they had done to the people of America. All so that they could have room for their ever-increasing population. It wasn't about race. China might have operated like a capitalist society over the last 20 years, but it was, without a doubt, a ruthless totalitarian regime. And as Huiyan had intimated, no one had a choice once the leaders had decided to attack America. I made a silent promise to make them pay whenever and wherever I could. I noticed a bright spot overhead. The sun was wrestling the weather for dominance of the day, and it appeared it would be just a matter of time before the thick, cloying mist began to dissipate. Will we make it out of Worcester before that? I wondered. There were some good things about it, I guess, Luke said, breaking the silence. It took me a moment to realize he was talking about the game again. If you could get past the antiquated graphics, some of the quests and dialogue options were pretty fun. Tell us about it. I thought Luke's prattling might be a good way to relieve some of the increasing tension in the cab of the truck. Indigo was sitting stiffly in her seat, her hand gripping the dash, obviously on edge. As best as I can recall, you created some people to be your adventurers, and when the game started, you were guardsmen of a kingdom sent to investigate a mysterious fog. Guardsmen in a kingdom? I thought you said the fog transported you to a magical land in the game, I said. I did, but you sort of started in one as well. The mist moved you to a different magical land because when the fog lifts, you're in a desert city with Egyptian-style monuments rather than the European-style medieval setting the game started out with. Ah, I see, I said. In truth, I wasn't really paying much attention. I was focused on driving through the fog, but the sound of his voice was comforting. Well, you start out by a hut, where this old gypsy woman gives you some clues about where to start your quest to defeat the evil ruler of the desert land, he said. As you go, you fight monsters and gain levels, making your characters more powerful until you finally throw down the ruler, who is the ancient undead mummy of the last pharaoh or something. Along the way, you have to answer a sphinx's riddle, rescue some people, and explore the catacombs beneath the temple. Sounds exciting, I replied. What was the name of the game? Damned if I remember. So it was more of an RPG-style game? Indigo asked. Most of the games you talk about are fighting games or shooters. I didn't know you liked role-playing games. I'm an equal opportunity gamer, Luke responded with a smile. About the only games I actively avoid are dancing games. Why? You'd be great at Dance-Off Evolution. Indigo said with a smile of her own. I couldn't tell if she was teasing him or not, but their playful banter suddenly made me even tenser than I was. Was I actually jealous of Luke because Indigo was teasing him and not me? You've obviously never seen me try to dance, Luke said. Anyway, that's about all there was to the game. It wasn't very layered, so it didn't take me long to beat it, just a couple of days of playing over spring break a couple of years ago. I think this is Park Avenue coming up, Indigo said, thankfully changing the topic. The one crossing this street at an angle. Get ready to make a sharp right turn. I see it, I replied, peering through the soupy mist, seeing the vague outline of an intersection. I stepped harder on the gas and the truck lurched forward as we rounded the corner. It was then Indigo sucked in a sharp breath. I slammed on the brakes and the truck screeched to a halt. Blocking the way ahead was an abandoned truck, and in the remaining lane, 2 deliberately placed motorcycles. Shit, said Luke under his breath. An instant later, the staccato stutter of a submachine gun erupted to our left. 4. We instinctively ducked down as my window shattered and bullets began peppering my door with loud pings. While a few stray bullets made their way into the cab, the paper reinforcement in the door seemed to hold up, and we rode out the storm of bullets until they slowed and then finally ceased. I risked a quick peek and saw 2 tigers I didn't recognize walking towards us as they reloaded what looked to my untrained eye like machine pistols. We only had seconds before they began firing again. Light me one of those bombs, quick, I said to Luke. He did as I asked, with no questions, and as soon as it was in my hand, I hurled it out through the driver's window. It clattered to a hissing and sputtering stop a few feet in front of the gunmen. They both stared down at it in surprise for a split second, before the furthest away of the 2 turned and ran. His buddy was not so quick, perhaps still deciding what it was, when it went off. The explosion was much louder than I expected, and he dropped to his knees screaming and holding his face. I hit the gas and we sped off, even as his buddy rushed over to him and began to help him to his feet. I drove straight at the bikes, the truck rolling over them with a lurching crunch of twisting metal and breaking glass. I sped off down the street, driving way too fast considering the low visibility conditions, and just hoped there was nothing in our way. We heard the faint rattle of machine gun fire behind us, but I don't think they even hit us this time. Well done, dude, Luke said. Is everyone okay? Yeah, I'm not hit, said Indigo. I'm good, I said. Then almost on cue, we heard the dull roar of motorcycles over the rush of wind through my windows. Damn it, yelled Indigo. Adrenaline was still coursing through my veins from our recent encounter, and from the way Luke and Indigo gripped the dashboard as I sped up, I knew they felt it too. The next few minutes were crucial. There would be no negotiating with the Tigers if they managed to disable the truck. They're behind us, Luke said unnecessarily, looking into his side mirror, the only one we had left. How many of them? Ah, crap, Indigo said, leaning towards Luke's side to see for herself, then back at me. All of them. Yeah, there are at least 6, Luke said, racking the slide of the crossbow, a weapon that in current circumstances seemed woefully inadequate. And that's just the ones close enough to see through the fog. He swung around so that he was kneeling in the seat facing backwards and leaned out through his window. He tried to brace himself and aim the crossbow at our pursuers, but gave up after a few seconds. I never realized how hard it was to shoot backwards from a moving vehicle. I'll just waste arrows if I try and fire on them, he said, pulling back inside. We could throw some more bombs behind us, Indigo suggested. Worth a shot, Luke said, grabbing one of the ink bombs from under the seat and pulling his lighter back out of his pocket. How long do you think I should cook it? I don't know, I said, but don't let it go off in here or we're screwed. It's hard enough to see as it is. I'll do my best. He lit the fuse and waited until it had half burned down, then tossed it through the window. Damn it, he said after a few seconds. They were past it by the time it blew. Try again, Indigo encouraged. She already had another ink bomb out and ready for him. I know you'll get it right this time. It came again. That jealous twinge. She wasn't teasing him, just encouraging him, but it still made me knot up a little. Really? You're doing this now, Isaac? I thought. Get over yourself. How close are they? I yelled over the noise of the wind rushing through the cabin. About a truck length back, Luke replied. Maybe let it burn down to 1/4 of an inch this time, I said, thinking about how much time it had taken to blow with a 1/2 inch of fuse left when I'd thrown it at the gunman. Yeah, drop it out your window, said Indigo. Let them come to it. Okay, he said, as he lit the second fuse. He let it burn down almost all the way before dropping it and putting his head out to watch the results. This time, the bang was loud enough to hear in the truck and was accompanied by the sound of screeching tires and scraping metal. Oh, yeah, he roared, pulling back inside, positively beaming ear to ear. One of the bikes went into a slide, and 2 others hit it. The rest slowed down and fell back into the fog. I kept the gas pedal down as far as I dared, only having to swerve once to avoid a car in the middle of the road, barely missing it as it appeared unexpectedly out of the fog. We could still hear the motorcycles following us, but they remained hidden in the roiling white emptiness behind the truck. How far is it to the freeway? I asked Indigo. About 2 miles. Oh my, you're bleeding, Isaac, she said. What? You're bleeding from your cheek. She watched as I reached up to my cheek and felt nothing. Your other cheek. I reached over to my other cheek. I felt a cold crust under my fingers, and I realized the wind whipping through my broken window must have frozen the blood on my face. I felt a ragged line above the frozen blood, and almost instantly my cheek started aching. The adrenaline had let me forge ahead without even realizing I was hurt, but now that I knew, I sure as hell felt it. I hope it's not too bad, I said. It looks like some flying glass cut you, probably when the window was shot in, Indigo said. I'll look it over for you when we get a chance to stop for a while. You could end up with a badass scar there, Chief, Luke said, looking across the cab at my wound. He almost sounded envious. I don't really want a scar on my face, badass or otherwise, I said. Man, I am kind of surprised to hear you say that. I thought you'd be into the scarred hero type look. Don't worry, Isaac. I think scars are sexy, Indigo said, and I felt my cheeks burn hot enough to melt the frozen blood of my wound. Maybe having a scar on my face wouldn't be so bad after all. Now slow down. We're almost to the freeway on-ramp. 5. We had not been on the freeway long when the fog began to thin out, and before we knew it, we were driving through a crystal clear and frigid New England day. Luke reported that the motorcycles were still following us, but had dropped back quite a ways. I hope those persistent bastards don't chase us all the way to the safe haven, Luke said, his eyes locked on the mirror. We definitely won't lead them there, I replied. Hopefully they give up before we have to do anything drastic. We rode in silence for a few minutes, our light mood at the temporary reprieve from our pursuers suddenly dampened by what we were witnessing. The freeway was clear of vehicles, but not through any stroke of luck. There must have been an almighty gridlock at one point as people tried to escape the city, but now the vehicles were piled and heaped to the sides of the road, as though a petulant child had swept his toy cars off a track in a fit of rage. That wasn't the worst. There were bodies, too. Some hanging out of cars, some half buried in the snowdrifts that were building on the wrecks. I glanced at Indigo and saw tears in her eyes as she took in the horrible sight. Bitter tears stung my own eyes. I didn't try to comfort her. We would probably see plenty worse than this before we reached the safe haven. The Chinese had cleared the freeway, and one had to assume they were doing the same to all the major roads between cities to ease their takeover and repopulation of the conquered continent. It only made sense. Luke looked into his mirror. They're still stalking us. I'm just glad their little convoy of motorbikes hasn't brought the Chinese down on us, he said. Yet, I said pointedly. Yeah, yet. That reminds me. I haven't heard... Oh, crap. I glanced at him and then down at the CB radio on the dashboard, and my stomach did a flip-flop. One of the bullets that had come through my window had torn through the side of it. We've been driving deaf for at least a half hour now. The whole damn Chinese army could be waiting around the next bend for all we know. Oh, well, said Luke. It's not like we have anybody who speaks Chinese up here anyway. Brooke is in back. Indigo gave him a look. Hey now, sorry, I didn't mean... I wasn't complaining. He looked mortified that she might think he was taking a swipe at her, and I found myself taking a perverse enjoyment out of his discomfort. I hope the others are okay, Indigo said, and I remembered the sound of the 9mm bullet slapping into the side of the cargo area. We can't stop to check on them as long as the tigers are stalking us, I said. Luke, grab your atlas. See if there is a way we can lose them up ahead. Will do, he said, no doubt happy the awkward moment had passed. He reached under his seat where he seemed to have stored everything but a kitchen sink. A few seconds later, he was opening his atlas to Massachusetts. Indigo, we got on here, right? He asked, pointing to a spot on the map. Yeah, that's the place, she said. I think I see a way, Luke said. Take the next exit and turn left off the end of the ramp. That should put us on Highway 12, and we can follow that up to the 140 and then take the 140 back to I-190. I've been that way before, Indigo said. It won't take us too far out of the way. All right then, maybe we can lose them on the way. I saw the exit coming up and slowed to take it, and as I did, the motorbikes closed some of the distance between us. Glancing back over my shoulder, I saw about 8 bikes, some of them with 2 tigers on. We were still well outnumbered, as 10 or 12 Chinese gangbangers were not something we were equipped to fight it out with, not even if everybody in the back was in good shape and ready to rumble. We just didn't have the firepower. The tigers would easily outgun us. My attention snapped back onto the ramp ahead of me, and I pulled us off of the freeway. The off-ramp was forested on either side, but almost as soon as we turned onto Highway 12, we passed an Ace Hardware and a grocery store. I would have liked to have stopped and looked for more supplies in both places, but with the tigers on our asses, it wasn't an option. Continuing up the highway, we passed a CVS pharmacy, and after that a couple of strip malls and an RV dealership as we left the outskirts of town. Worcester was finally in our rearview mirror, but unfortunately, so were the tigers. With the fog lifted, I could open it up a little more, but I didn't get above 50 or so. That seemed to be the speed at which the truck began to protest by shaking and whining. I knew there was no way that a rental truck was going to outrun the tigers' motorcycles. Not for long, anyway. We need to get far enough ahead so we can find a place where there's a corner to hide the truck. Hopefully they'll zoom on by and we can go the other way, I said. I don't know if that's going to cut it, Luke said, looking back. These guys are hardcore, and they're not letting us out of their line of vision. I can't believe that wasting a couple of them pissed off enough to risk the Chinese. Yeah, about that, I said. You remember the guy I killed in the alley, back when we saved Indigo? Seriously, dude? You're asking if I remember the guy you gunned down in front of me? Yeah, well, he was... What? Luke and Indigo asked at the same time. The younger brother of Chen, the leader of the tigers, I said, not looking at them and keeping my eyes on the road. Really? Luke asked. What did I tell you? I said. If it wasn't for bad luck. Well, I don't care who he was. I'm glad you did it. You guys are my knights in shining armor, even if your shining armor is a stained parka, she said to me, and then to Luke. And your sword, a crossbow. So are they going to hunt us to the ends of the earth now, or what? Luke asked. I hope not, I replied. But back at the parking garage, I came face to face with him, and he looked mad. No, more than mad. He looked psycho. I'm pretty sure he will keep coming after us until one of us is dead. Either him or me. Since we've turned off, have we gained any ground? No. In fact, they've started creeping closer again. The road swerved to the right, and I could see we were coming up to a long bridge over a stretch of water. Just on the other side of this bridge, you want to turn left. It'll take us back toward the freeway. That's a big lake, I said when the trees to the side thinned out as we approached the bridge. I realized I could only see part of the lake as it stretched to my left. There were places where it bent around, forming large coves. That's the Wachusett Reservoir, Indigo said. My uncle used to bring me and my cousin fishing here sometimes when we were little. There was a sign that proclaimed the bridge prone to ice in the winter, but I ignored it and kept up my speed as we hit it. I could hear the motorcycles again, and the roar of their engines were getting louder. It occurred to me they meant to take us while we were crossing the lake. I got my revolver ready and lay it on my lap in case any of them pulled alongside, and saw Luke was likewise preparing his crossbow for action. "They're coming," Luke said, looking in his mirror. I nodded grimly. The roar of bikes told me that they were getting very close now. "Oh, no," moaned Indigo as we crested the bridge and started descending to the other side. In front of us was our worst nightmare, a roadblock manned by Chinese soldiers at the other end of the bridge. 6. Wooden barricades were placed across the end of the bridge, and an armored vehicle, topped by a wicked-looking cannon, and 4 Humvees were parked behind them. Standing at the barrier, watching us come toward them, were at least 8 Chinese soldiers, and I could see more behind the vehicles. We were trapped between the Tigers and the Chinese army, with no way out. "You gotta be shitting me," Luke said. "Figures, doesn't it?" I said, through gritted teeth. "What are we going to do?" Indigo asked. "Die, probably," I said, unable to hide the despair in my voice. "I'm not stopping. They'll have to kill us. That's the only way they're stopping this truck." "Yep. This reminds me of that old country song about the convoy," Luke said. I had no idea what he was talking about and wondered how, just seconds from death, Luke could be spouting crap about songs probably written before either of us was born. Maybe it was a coping mechanism? Mine was anger. I stomped the gas pedal hard into the floor. "You guys might want to get down as low as possible," I said. "The engine block should give you some protection." The Chinese soldiers in front of us suddenly realized they were in imminent danger and began scrambling to ready their weapons and take cover behind their vehicles. We were maybe 100 yards from the barricades when the Tigers opened up with submachine guns and pistols behind us. I heard a few hit the truck, but most seemed to be missing, probably because shooting and riding a motorcycle at the same time isn't easy. The effect on the Chinese, though, was amazing. They seemed to think the Tigers were shooting at them, and responded accordingly. The last 100 yards to the barricades seemed to take forever to cross. If you asked me later, I would have sworn it took at least 5 minutes, but I know, given how fast I was driving, it had to have happened in no more than a few seconds. It's funny how time can seem so elastic when the proverbial shit is hitting the fan. Indigo put her hand on my thigh, but I hardly noticed. We all hunkered down, Luke and Indigo below the level of the dashboard, and me with just my eyes and forehead peeking over so that I could see where I was driving. A few shots hit the windshield, high on the passenger side, and I felt a couple hitting the cargo box where it rose above the cab, but for the most part, the Chinese fire seemed to be concentrating on the motorcycles behind us. If they think we are a Chinese military truck, we might still get out of this. The hopeful thought shot through my head. The soldiers manning the barricade were not like the ones we'd been captured by. They wore simple gray-green trench coats rather than the urban camouflage with padded armor points, and they carried old-style rifles. I later learned they were conscripts and had no choice about whether they wanted to be in the army or not, and that the Chinese army was mostly made up of soldiers just like them. The armored personnel carrier actually looked like a small tank to me, and to my horror, as I examined it, the turret started to turn in our direction. I saw it inching around in slow motion, and I wondered if we'd make it to the barricades before it fired. We did. Barely. We crashed through the wooden barrier, and Chinese soldiers leapt out of our way as we careened through. The armored personnel carrier started firing at the motorcycles behind us. I realized that rather than a cannon, the gun on the turret was more like a giant machine gun, and right now it was spitting hot metal death at the tigers on our tail. The truck was heading straight for a Humvee, and I slammed on the brakes and turned the wheel hard to my left. We skidded sideways, sweeping up 3 Chinese soldiers who hadn't jumped out of the way quickly enough. They were crunched between us as I sideswiped the personnel carrier, causing both vehicles to shudder. The truck slewed back to the right and stopped in the center of the intersection with a screech of tires. Still alive. "Are you okay?" I asked the other 2. Indigo nodded, and a shaken Luke risked a glance through his window as I took stock of our situation. "Damn, the tigers are getting massacred, man," he said. "We should get the hell out of here while the Chinese are distracted." I peeked over my shoulder and out of the window. Luke was right. The tigers were being slaughtered, but not all of them. Well back on the bridge, far enough that the fire of the soldiers' machine guns was ineffectual, an all-too-familiar figure straddled his bike. Chen, with the last 2 of his crew on their bikes flanking him, stood sentinel and looked down upon the destruction of the red tigers. I knew it was impossible, but I felt like Chen was staring right at me, and I shivered. Finally, as the turret on the armored vehicle began to whir and slowly raise its muzzle toward them, the remaining Chen and his men gunned their bikes and spun around, racing from the scene. I snapped out of my trance. It was only then that I noticed movement to my left. "I think it might be too late," I said, glancing out my window. A group of 6 Chinese soldiers were approaching from the rear of the truck on my side, waving their hands and shouting, although their words were lost in the roar of the gunfire going on around us. "Indigo, hand me the rifle behind you," I said, sorry that her hand would be leaving my thigh. I slid the revolver back into my parka pocket. 3 soldiers, 2 with rifles and 1 armed only with a sidearm, approached the cab of the truck, while the other 3 stayed by the back corner. I ducked down as they approached. The soldier with the handgun, I think he might have been an officer of some sort, shouted something in Chinese just outside the driver's side door. I tensed as the door handle twitched and was yanked open. There was a look of surprise on his face when he saw me scrunched down there with the assault rifle aimed straight at him. At least I tell myself there was when I think back. In reality, everything happened too fast for me to notice. At this range, I couldn't miss, and my chest shot went straight through the officer's body and into the soldier behind him. Both crumpled to the ground. The 3rd soldier began to bring his own assault rifle up as I swung my weapon towards him. I wasn't going to be quick enough. I heard a soft spitting sound next to my head, and the soldier, wearing his own look of surprise, dropped one hand from his rifle and scrabbled in a futile attempt to remove the crossbow arrow embedded in his larynx. He dropped to his knees and slowly fell forward, squeezing his trigger as he fell. One bullet pinged into the metal of the dash right by my head, another into the floor, and the last of the 3-round burst triggered by his death spasm slapped harmlessly into the roadway beneath the cab. Reeling, I saw Luke rack another short arrow into the crossbow. I shook my head to clear it, and leaned out of the door to see one of the soldiers by the back of the truck aiming his rifle my way. There were 3 flashes, and the open door jerked behind me. I brought my own rifle around and returned fire. One of the 3 rounds found its mark, and the soldier fell, grabbing at his thigh. Behind me there was another spitting sound, and I heard a body hit the asphalt. Luke pulled back from his window. "Go!" he yelled. I slammed the driver's side door and tried to restart the truck. It had stalled when we'd skidded to a stop. Despite my sense of impending doom, the truck turned over on the second try, and I slammed my foot on the gas and turned left. We shot down the road that would take us back to the freeway, leaving the firefight behind.